Clara Thompson sat stiffly in the back of the wagon, her hands tightly clasped around the worn leather strap of her bonnet. Dust from the Arizona Trail coated her skirts, and the sun, dipping low behind the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, burned her cheeks. At 18, Clara had dreamed of romance, of gentle courtship and whispered promises beneath moonlit skies. Instead, she found herself on the brink of a marriage that had been arranged not for love, but for survival, a union with Red Hawk, a man the frontier whispered about in fear, the so-called dreaded Apache. The town of Tombstone had offered little comfort. Her parents, practical folk hardened by droughts and cattle rustlers, insisted that this match would secure peace between settlers and the Apache tribe that roamed the nearby canyons. Clara's heart thumped violently at the thought of living among people whose customs she barely understood. Tales of Apache warriors fierce, untamed, and relentless filled her with dread. Every horror story told by settlers seemed magnified in her imagination. Would he be cruel? Would she be trapped in a life she could not escape? The wagon creaked over the rocky trail as Clara's thoughts churned. Around her, the vast expanse of the frontier stretched endlessly, cacti casting long shadows, mesas standing like ancient sentinels, and the dusty road curling toward an unknown fate. Her fear was mirrored in the silence of the desert, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow or the rattling of distant tumbleweeds. Every mile brought her closer to the village of the Apache, and each mile tightened the knot of anxiety in her stomach. When the wagon finally slowed at the edge of the village, Clara could see the small collection of huts, carefully hidden within the bends of the creek, blending seamlessly with the landscape. She had expected chaos, perhaps a scene of threatening warriors brandishing bows and arrows. Instead, the Apache went about their tasks with quiet purpose, a woman grinding corn, a man sharpening a knife, children laughing and chasing one another under the fading sun. There was order here, a rhythm to life that seemed foreign yet oddly familiar in its simplicity. Red Hawk appeared then, stepping from the shadows of a mesquite grove. He was tall, with eyes like polished obsidian and a presence that seemed to command the very air around him. Clara's breath caught. The stories of his savagery battled with the calm dignity in his gaze. He did not approach her with arrogance or threat. Instead, he bowed his head in a silent greeting, allowing her to take the first step forward. Clara's first instinct was to shrink back. Every story she had ever heard painted this man as a monster. But as she looked closer, she saw details others had missed: the careful way he tended the fire outside his hut, the patience with which he listened to a child asking questions, the respect he showed his elders. The warrior feared no one, yet he seemed gentle toward those in his care. A part of her began to realize that the man she feared might be far more complex than the frontier gossip suggested. Her parents, standing stiffly behind her, offered no comfort, only tight smiles and whispered instructions. "Remember, Clara," her mother said, "this marriage is about more than feelings. It is about peace. Do not let fear guide you." Clara swallowed hard. Peace. That was a concept she could understand, though it weighed heavily on her young shoulders. She had been raised among settlers who viewed the world as a constant battle for survival, where courage was measured in gunfire and grit. But here, in this quiet village, survival seemed tied to understanding, respect, and harmony with the land. Her heart ached as she stepped closer, her hands trembling. This was no longer the world of her father's ranch, where the danger was tangible and the rules clear. This was the frontier in its rawest form, a place where cultures collided, and where the strength of character mattered as much as the strength of arms. Every step she took brought her closer to a man she did not know and a life she had not chosen. And yet, as Red Hawk extended a hand, not in force, but in invitation, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the stories were wrong. Perhaps this marriage could be more than duty. Perhaps it could be a bridge between two worlds, and a lesson in courage she had yet to learn. Clara's tears began to fall quietly, not from despair alone, but from the enormity of the moment. She was leaving behind the familiar, stepping into a life that challenged everything she had been taught. And yet, beneath her fear, curiosity stirred. The frontier was vast, wild, and unpredictable, but perhaps it could teach her more than she had ever imagined. The sun had vanished behind the western cliffs, leaving the desert awash in a deep violet twilight. Clara Thompson clutched the edge of the doorway to Red Hawk's hut, her breath coming in small, nervous bursts. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of sage smoke and earth, a comforting aroma in contrast to the dry heat outside. Every movement seemed magnified, every shadow a threat. Red Hawk knelt by a small fire in the center of the hut, arranging kindling with deliberate care. The flames flickered, casting patterns across the walls, and Clara noticed the intricate designs etched into the wood symbols she would later learn told stories of Apache ancestors, of battles fought and wisdom passed through generations. Her fear lingered, but curiosity tugged at her heart. She had expected chaos, perhaps the menace of a warrior's fury. Instead, she saw precision, artistry, and order. "Sit," Red Hawk said softly, his voice deep but not harsh. He gestured toward a woven mat near the fire. Clara hesitated, glancing around the hut. It was small, humble, yet neat. A few mats, a clay water jar, a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a hook. Every item seemed to serve a purpose, reflecting a life in harmony with nature rather than domination over it. Tentatively, she lowered herself to the mat, careful not to make a sound that might betray her nervousness. Red Hawk observed her with quiet patience, neither judging nor rushing her. Then he reached for a small bundle of cornmeal and began to prepare a simple dish. "Corn is our gift from the land," he said, as though reading her thoughts. "We respect it. Waste it, and you waste life itself." Clara watched him work, amazed at the care with which he handled the food, the way he shaped it, almost as if each motion were a dance. The young bride realized she had expected fear and cruelty, but instead she was witnessing a ritual of respect, a quiet ceremony of sustenance and survival. She remembered the stories her teacher in Tombstone had once told her about the Apache, how they were not savages, but skilled hunters, trackers, and farmers who understood the desert better than anyone. Here, in this hut, Clara was seeing that truth for herself. Red Hawk finally offered her a portion of the meal. "Eat," he said, smiling faintly. The gesture was simple, yet for Clara it felt monumental. She had imagined a man of violence, a warrior who would demand obedience through fear. Instead, he offered patience, guidance, and food. Hesitant at first, she took a bite. The flavor was earthy, warm, and comforting. She realized then that survival on the frontier required knowledge, respect, and a deep understanding of one's environment qualities. She had never associated with the feared warrior outside. The night deepened, and Clara's initial terror slowly gave way to fascination. Red Hawk began to speak, telling stories of the stars above and the desert below. He described how the Apache tracked animals, predicted weather, and read the land for water and shelter. Every story carried a lesson, and Clara found herself absorbing each one, her fear giving way to awe. The warrior's reputation on the frontier as dreaded now seemed like a mask that hid a teacher, a protector and a guardian of knowledge. When she dared to speak, Clara asked questions about plants, animals, the patterns of the stars, and Red Hawk answered with patience, never condescending, never hurried. She realized that fear had blinded her to possibility. This man, who had inspired dread in the settlement, held knowledge that could keep her alive, safe. and thriving in a world she had barely begun to understand. By the time the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Clara's tears had dried. She felt a fragile sense of hope, an understanding that this marriage could be more than a duty imposed by her parents. It could be a bridge not just between her world and the Apache, but between fear and knowledge, prejudice and understanding. As she lay on her mat that night, staring at the shadowed walls and the glowing embers of the fire, Clara realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to learn and trust despite it. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps Red Hawk, the man the frontier called dreaded, could teach her more than survival. He could teach her how to live. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the Apache village. Outside, the desert was alive with whispering winds that carried the scent of sage and the distant cry of coyotes. Clara Thompson lay on the woven mat, her fingers clutching the rough fibers as if they were a lifeline. Her heart raced, not from the walk, not from the day's journey, but from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the man she had married, fear of being utterly alone in a world so different from Tombstone. The hut was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the dying fire. Red Hawk had gone outside, leaving her with a small lantern whose flickering light cast dancing shadows across the walls. Clara tried to steady her breathing, but every sound outside, the rustle of mesquite leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, set her nerves on edge. She pictured him as the frontier stories had, relentless, fierce, and merciless. She imagined what might happen if he judged her ignorance, her naivety, her fear. Minutes passed like hours, and Clara's thoughts swirled. She thought of her mother's warnings. Remember, Clara, the frontier is not forgiving. Respect earns you survival, and ignorance can cost you everything. She realized now that her mother's words were not just about manners. They were about life and death, about understanding the people who shared this harsh land. The frontier was vast, untamed, and dangerous, but knowledge could turn fear into safety. Red Hawk returned quietly, his presence like a shadow settling beside her mat. Clara flinched at the sound, her pulse quickening. He knelt and looked at her, not with judgment, but with calm awareness. His eyes were steady, holding no malice, only the kind of understanding that comes from knowing the weight of fear firsthand. "You are afraid," he said softly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Clara's eyes widened. How could he know? She had not spoken a word since sunset, but in the stillness, she realized that fear was transparent. It lived in her posture, her trembling hands, the tight set of her jaw. I don't know your ways," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I don't know what to do. I've only heard stories. Stories that frighten me." Red Hawk nodded slowly. "Stories are often made by those who do not understand," he said. "Some are true, many are not. Courage is not in denying fear, but in learning what is real and what is false." He reached for a small bundle of dried herbs, lighting them carefully and letting the fragrant smoke drift through the room. "This is sage," he explained. "It clears the mind, but also reminds us to respect the land. Every living thing has a place, even fear. Acknowledge it, and it will not control you." Clara watched him, mesmerized. Here was the man the frontier feared, yet he was teaching her without force, without threat, how to navigate her own terror. She began to breathe more steadily, letting the scent of sage calm her frayed nerves. For the first time, she realized that Red Hawk's strength was not in intimidation, but in knowledge, patience, and self-control. Hours passed, and Clara's panic slowly transformed into curiosity. She asked about the stars, about the patterns in the desert, about the ways the Apache read the land for signs of water and game. Red Hawk answered with precision and care, each story rich with practical wisdom. She learned how the Apache tracked animals by subtle marks on sand, how they conserved water in hidden caches, how they understood the desert as a living map rather than a barren wasteland. By the time she finally closed her eyes, Clara felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and enlightenment. Her fear had not vanished, but it had shifted. The dread of the dreaded Apache was replaced by awe for a man who embodied the wisdom and resilience necessary to survive the frontier. She realized that courage was not simply wielding a gun or standing unafraid before danger, it was listening, learning, and opening one's heart to understanding, even when fear threatened to dominate it. As the night deepened, the desert around them seemed less hostile, less alien. Clara's tears of anxiety were replaced by a flicker of hope. Perhaps this marriage, forced though it had been, could be a path not only to survival, but to connection, knowledge, and trust. And as Red Hawk settled beside the dying embers, she understood that the frontier could teach her more than fear. It could teach her how to live. The first rays of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the rugged landscape in shades of amber and rose. Clara Thompson stirred on her mat, blinking against the gentle light. The fear that had gripped her the night before still lingered, but it felt lighter somehow, as though the desert itself had whispered reassurance. Outside, the village was already stirring, the soft rhythm of life moving steadily, purposefully, without chaos or threat. Red Hawk was waiting for her at the edge of the village, standing beside a small fire he had built. He did not rush her, did not demand obedience or immediate acceptance. Instead, he offered a nod, a silent invitation to follow him. Hesitating for only a moment, Clara rose and stepped into the crisp morning air. The warmth of the sun and the hum of life around her made the desert feel less like a prison and more like a living, breathing place. He led her first to the communal area, where Apache women were grinding corn on stone metates, their hands skilled and rhythmic. Children played nearby, laughing and chasing each other in a game Clara had never seen, yet somehow recognized. The women glanced at her with curiosity but not hostility. Red Hawk introduced her with quiet dignity, explaining that she was his wife and part of their community. "Observe first," he said softly. "We do not rush new members. We learn from each other." Clara watched the women move with grace and efficiency. She realized that every action, every grind of corn, every sweep of the hearth was purposeful. The Apache valued utility, harmony, and respect for the land. Each movement was both practical and symbolic, a ritual of life that had been passed down for generations. She felt a spark of awe. These were not stories of savages she had heard in Tombstone. These were people thriving through intelligence, skill, and cooperation. Red Hawk then took her to a small garden behind his hut, where native herbs and vegetables grew in neat rows. "Everything we grow has a purpose," he explained, plucking a sprig of oregano. "Medicine, food, seasoning. We waste nothing. Respect the earth, and it will respect you." He handed her a small hoe, and with gentle guidance, Clara began to dig the soil, planting seeds that would one day feed the community. Each movement, each careful pat of the earth, was a lesson in patience, responsibility, and connection to the land. The day passed slowly, yet it was rich with discovery. Red Hawk taught her how to track small animals, read subtle signs in the sand, and identify plants that could heal a wound or soothe a fever. Clara absorbed each lesson eagerly, marveling at how much she had misunderstood about the man she had feared. The warrior's calm demeanor and careful instruction revealed a side of him the frontier had never seen. Thoughtful, wise, and deeply attuned to life around him. That evening, Red Hawk led her to the fire circle where the village gathered. He told stories of the ancestors, of battles fought, lessons learned, and respect earned. Clara listened, fascinated. She realized that the tales she had dismissed as mere legend were rich with practical wisdom, navigation, survival, strategy, and respect for nature. In these stories, Courage was not measured by violence, but by the strength of character, patience, and understanding of the world. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of belonging. The fear that had seemed so overwhelming the night before had softened into respect, curiosity, and even gratitude. She looked at Red Hawk not as the dreaded Apache of frontier gossip, but as a teacher, a guide, and perhaps, even if she dared not admit it, a protector. As the night settled over the desert, Clara and Red Hawk returned to his hut. He did not demand closeness or obedience. Instead, he offered her a small smile and a quiet word of reassurance. "You are learning," he said. "That is courage. You will understand more as you live here. Fear is natural, but it does not define you." Clara lay on her mat that night, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She realized that trust was not given. It was built through patience, guidance, and gentle gestures that allowed understanding to grow. And in that quiet desert night, surrounded by the wisdom of a people she had once feared, she felt the first glimmer of hope that perhaps this marriage could be more than duty. It could be a bridge between worlds and between hearts. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of desert sage and the warmth of the rising sun. Clara Thompson followed Red Hawk to the edge of the village, where the rugged terrain of the Arizona frontier stretched endlessly. Her boots crunched over loose sand and rocks as her heart thrummed, not with fear, but with cautious anticipation. The lessons of the previous day had begun to settle into her mind, and she realized that the man she had dreaded might hold wisdom far beyond her imagination. Red Hawk motioned for her to stop at a low ridge overlooking the valley. "Look," he said, pointing toward the distant mesas and winding riverbeds. "The land tells stories. Watch how the sun touches the cliffs. See where the shadows fall. The desert speaks to those who listen." Clara squinted, trying to follow his gaze. At first, all she saw was a harsh, unforgiving landscape. But as Red Hawk spoke, pointing out subtle signs, a trail of antelope tracks, the location of hidden waterholes, the pattern of wind in the sand, she began to understand. Each mark, each contour, each shift in the earth was a message, a piece of survival knowledge handed down through generations. Her fear of the unknown slowly gave way to fascination. "You see," Red Hawk continued, "fear comes from not knowing. Understanding changes fear into respect. Respect changes it into connection." Clara nodded, realizing he was not simply speaking of the land, but of life, of their marriage, and of the bridge she was slowly building between her world and his. Later that day, Red Hawk invited her to help prepare a trap for small game. Hesitant at first, Clara learned to set the delicate mechanism, to cover it with sand, and to wait patiently without touching it. He explained how each trap was designed, not to waste the animal, how every part of a catch meat, hide, bones was used fully. The practicality astonished her, and she began to see the depth of his intelligence, the thoughtfulness behind the life she had once feared. As the sun sank low, Red Hawk led Clara to a small grove where the village gathered for a ritual of thanks. The Apache sang songs of the earth, stories of ancestors, and tales of survival. Clara listened, absorbing not just the words, but the rhythm, the intention, the meaning. She understood then that courage was not brute strength, but a quiet, steady knowledge of oneself and one's surroundings. Red Hawk had never raised his voice, never demanded obedience. He had guided her with patience, showing that true power came from understanding and respect. That evening, as they walked back to the village, Clara felt a connection she had never expected. She had feared him, had imagined him as a monster, a figure of terror whispered about in settler taverns. Yet here he was gentle, wise, and unwaveringly patient. She found herself laughing quietly at a small story he shared about a mischievous coyote, and she felt warmth spreading in her chest, replacing the cold fear that had dominated her thoughts. Red Hawk noticed her smile. "You are learning," he said softly. "You see not just the land, but the life within it. That is the beginning of trust." Clara's eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt as though the frontier's fearsome rumors had no bearing on the man before her. He was not the dreaded Apache the settlers feared. He was a teacher, a protector, and perhaps, even in some small way, a companion who could guide her through this strange, beautiful world. That night, Clara lay on her mat, reflecting on the day. The desert outside was still, yet alive with unseen movement. The soft rustle of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through mesquite trees, the faint call of an owl. She realized that the frontier was not merely a place of danger, it was a place of learning, of observation, of connection. Red Hawk had shown her that understanding, respect, and patience were the true tools of survival. Her fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed. She no longer saw the world as a series of threats, nor Red Hawk as a figure to dread. Instead, she saw a possibility, a path toward knowledge, harmony, and perhaps even love. The warrior she had married in tears had surprised her beyond expectation. The frontier, harsh and unpredictable, had begun to feel like a classroom, and Red Hawk its patient teacher. As the embers of the fire glowed faintly, Clara whispered to herself, "Perhaps I can learn to live here. Perhaps I can learn to trust." For the first time, she believed that this marriage could be more than a duty, it could be the start of something profound, a bond built on understanding rather than fear, and a lesson for all who watched from the settlements. The desert morning was deceptively quiet. Clara Thompson had grown accustomed to the rhythm of village life, the quiet chatter of the Apache women, the laughter of children, the soft thrum of Red Hawk's footsteps. Yet that morning, an unease hung in the air, prickling at her instincts. The horizon shimmered with heat, but it also carried a darker tension. A group of outsiders, rough men with guns, dusted in the arrogance of frontier lawlessness, were moving toward the village. "They are settlers," Red Hawk said, his voice calm but firm as he crouched beside Clara. "They do not understand our ways, nor do they care. Some come to trade, others to take." Clara's heart pounded. She had feared him before, but now, fear mingled with a new realization. She trusted him. She had learned from him, seen his wisdom, and witnessed his connection to this land. Now she watched as he transformed from teacher to leader, his calm demeanor shifting into decisive action. Red Hawk called the village together. His words were precise, clear, and measured. "We protect what is ours. We do not provoke, but we do not flee. Stand with your families, observe the land, and follow the signals." He divided the villagers into groups, some to secure food and water, others to tend the children, and a few to create obstacles along the path of the approaching men. Every movement was deliberate, every instruction rooted in strategy and knowledge of the terrain. Clara observed, all mingling with fear. As the intruders approached, Red Hawk moved silently through the shadows, scouting the path ahead. Clara followed at a distance, remembering his lessons: how to read footprints, how to anticipate movement, how to use the environment to one's advantage. The desert, once alien and threatening, now felt like a familiar map, alive with signs only someone who listened could read. The confrontation came suddenly. The outsiders, convinced the village would offer no resistance, approached openly, guns swinging. Red Hawk met them strategically. His people moved quickly, using cover, shadows, and their intimate knowledge of the terrain to block and confuse the attackers. Clara watched in awe as the villagers worked seamlessly together, following his lead. There was no chaos, no panic, only coordination, courage, and intelligence. Red Hawk's voice rang out, commanding attention not through fear, but through authority and calm. Leave or face the consequences. Respect life and respect the land. His warning carried weight. The attackers hesitated, unsure of the disciplined resistance they faced. Clara realized that true power did not always roar, it often whispered in knowledge, strategy, and unwavering presence. The intruders soon retreated, unable to match the villagers' skill and planning. Red Hawk returned to the village, guiding Clara through the aftermath. She helped tend minor injuries, offering comfort where she could. Her hands no longer shook, her fear replaced by focus, understanding, and a growing respect for the community she had once dreaded. Sitting beside the fire that evening, Red Hawk spoke quietly. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said, eyes reflecting the glow of the flames. "It is understanding what you fear, preparing for it, and facing it. Today you watched fear turn into strength, not just mine, but yours and everyone who stood with us." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her chest. The warrior she had married in tears was not just a protector, he was a teacher of life, resilience, and wisdom. The frontier had tested them, and in that trial, she had learned her own courage. She no longer trembled in fear of him or of the unknown. Instead, she had found trust, admiration, and a sense of belonging. As the desert night embraced the village, Clara and Red Hawk sat together, quiet but connected. She understood now that marriage, survival, and life on the frontier were lessons of patience, observation, and respect. And as the stars sparkled above, mapping constellations that guided travelers for generations, she realized that she had not only survived the day, she had grown. The frontier, once harsh and frightening, had become a classroom, and Red Hawk its patient, wise teacher. The desert morning came slowly, the sky painted in gentle shades of orange and pink. Clara Thompson stepped outside Red Hawk's hut, the night's lessons still vivid in her mind. The village had settled back into its rhythm after the encounter with the outlaws, but the echoes of the day's tension lingered. Clara felt a calm she had never known, a sense of connection not just to Red Hawk, but to the land and the people who called it home. She found Red Hawk at the edge of the creek, observing the water's flow with the quiet patience she had come to admire. When he noticed her, a small, knowing smile appeared on his face. "You survived yesterday well," he said softly. "You watched. You learned. You acted without panic. That is strength." Clara blushed, recalling how terrified she had felt the previous night, how every sound of the desert had seemed a threat. Yet now, fear had transformed into understanding, and understanding had turned into trust. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, guided by knowledge and respect. Red Hawk had taught her more than survival skills. He had taught her how to live. He beckoned her to walk with him along the creek. The water ran clear, reflecting the sky above. As they moved, he explained how the Apache used the water not only for drinking, but for irrigation and for sustaining small crops along the riverbed. He spoke of balance, how every action in the environment had a consequence, how respect for life was essential for survival. Clara listened intently, absorbing every word. "Do you see now?" Red Hawk asked gently. "Life is a circle. Fear, anger, bravery, they all have their place. But without understanding, they control you. With understanding, they guide you." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. She realized that her tears, her fear, and her hesitation were all part of the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had crossed boundaries of culture, geography, and prejudice, and she had emerged not broken, but stronger and wiser. They returned to the village, where Clara helped the women with daily chores, sharing in their work and learning their songs and stories. Red Hawk watched quietly from a distance, allowing her space but staying close enough to offer guidance. She felt a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. The frontier, once a place of isolation and terror, had become a community she could trust, a world she could navigate with knowledge and care. That evening, under the glow of the fire circle, Red Hawk spoke of his own life, the lessons of his ancestors, the hardships of survival, and the responsibilities of leadership. Clara listened, enthralled. For the first time, she saw the man not as a dreaded warrior, but as a human being shaped by history, culture, and responsibility. She realized that admiration and respect could grow into something deeper, something personal and profound. As the night deepened, Red Hawk turned to her. "You no longer fear," he said quietly. "You understand." "You see." His hand brushed gently against hers, a gesture of connection and trust. Clara met his gaze, and in that moment, she understood that marriage on the frontier was not merely about survival or duty, it was about partnership, trust, and shared growth. Clara's lips curved into a small smile. "I never thought I could learn this much," she admitted, "or feel this much." Red Hawk's smile was faint but warm. "Life teaches us in ways we cannot anticipate," he said. "Sometimes through fear, sometimes through challenge, sometimes through gentle guidance." In the quiet desert night, surrounded by the glow of the fire and the whispers of the wind through mesquite trees, Clara realized she had transformed. Her fear had given way to knowledge, her tears to trust, her isolation to connection. She had learned to see the frontier not as a place of terror, but as a living, breathing teacher, and she had learned to see Red Hawk not as a threat, but as a guide, a protector, and perhaps even a partner in heart. The frontier, with all its dangers and mysteries, had revealed its lessons. Courage was patient, strength was measured in wisdom, and love could grow from understanding. Clara, the young bride who had arrived in tears, now walked beside her husband with a heart full of respect, trust, and hope for the life they would build together. The first light of morning spread across the desert, turning the horizon into a canvas of gold and amber. Clara Thompson awoke to the gentle sound of water trickling in the creek and the distant chatter of the village. She stretched, feeling a sense of peace she had never known when she first arrived in the Apache village. The young bride who had once trembled in fear now felt grounded, confident, and connected to the land and to the man who had guided her through this transformation. Red Hawk was already outside, tending to a small fire and the morning rituals of the village. When he saw Clara emerge, he offered a simple, warm smile. "Today is a good day," he said. "Not because the sun rises, but because we rise with it, together." Clara returned the smile, feeling the depth of his words. The lessons of fear, patience, courage, and respect had coalesced into something tangible, a shared life, built on understanding and trust. The villagers were bustling with preparation for a small celebration. News of Clara's growing courage and her active participation in village life had spread. The community wanted to honor her journey from the frightened outsider to a respected member who had shown curiosity, humility, and resilience. Clara felt her cheeks warm as Red Hawk guided her to the center of the gathering. She looked around at the faces of the Apache men and women, at the children's laughter, at the elders nodding in approval, and felt a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. Red Hawk stepped forward beside her. "Clara has learned," he said, addressing the group. "She has faced fear, asked questions, and observed the land and its lessons. She has become part of our community. Today, we celebrate not just her courage, but the bond between worlds." Clara's heart swelled. She realized that this marriage, once imposed upon her and feared, had become a bridge between two cultures, a partnership that honored both her upbringing and the wisdom of the Apache. She looked at Red Hawk and saw not a dreaded warrior, but a man whose strength was measured in knowledge, patience, and integrity. As the celebration continued, Clara participated, fully helping to prepare food, singing along with the songs of the elders and sharing laughter with the children. She even tried her hand at weaving, guided by the women, and found satisfaction in the skill and precision it demanded. Each action reinforced a lesson she had learned over the past days, that survival and life on the frontier required observation, respect, and collaboration. Later, as the sun began to set and the desert sky turned to deep shades of purple, Red Hawk and Clara walked together along the creek. He took her hand gently, and she felt the warmth of trust between them. "You have grown," he said softly, "not just in courage, but in understanding. That is the true measure of strength." Clara smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "I have learned so much," she admitted, "not just about survival, but about respect, patience, and trust. And I have learned that love can grow where understanding grows first." Red Hawk nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the twilight. "The frontier teaches us in ways we cannot always predict," he said. "It tests fear, challenges judgment, and rewards those willing to learn. Together, we will continue to learn and to protect this land and each other." That night, as stars blanketed the sky, Clara and Red Hawk sat by the fire, sharing stories and dreams for the future. The desert, once a place of isolation and fear, had become a home, a teacher, and a bridge between two worlds. Clara understood now that true courage was born from understanding, true love from trust, and true peace from respect. In the days and years that followed, Clara became a revered figure in both the village and the nearby settlements, sharing her experiences and teaching others the lessons she had learned, that fear could be transformed into knowledge, that courage was measured in patience and wisdom, and that understanding between cultures could build a stronger, safer, and more harmonious frontier. The young bride who had arrived in tears had grown into a woman of strength, insight, and compassion. And beside her, Red Hawk, the man the frontier once called dreaded, stood not as a figure of fear, but as a partner, protector, and teacher. Together, they embodied the promise of the frontier, a land of challenge, discovery, and connection, where fear could give way to trust and tears could give way to joy.